Welcome to this deep dive.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, and if you are listening to this right now, we know exactly who you are.
Oh, absolutely.
You are the learner. You're that insanely curious person who's always hunting for those aha moments.
But without the burnout.
Right. You want the insight without drowning in that overwhelming flood of modern information. You're looking for clarity, perspective, and I think a challenge to the way you see the world.
And today's source material is 100% that kind of intellectual challenge. We're diving into a really reflective, deeply thought-provoking essay titled Beliefs.
Which is brand new, right?
Brand new. Published today, March 7th, 2026, by an author named Jimmy Perez. It's on his site, Student of the Human Condition.
Such a great title for a site.
It really is.
So the mission for this deep dive is to explore a boundary that most of us treat as completely solid, but, when you really look at it, it's actually incredibly blurry.
The line between fact and belief?
Exactly. The line between what we know as objective fact and what we hold as personal belief. And recognizing the difference between those two things isn't just some exercise in semantics.
No, not at all.
It fundamentally changes how we navigate our daily lives, how we unlock our potential, and honestly, how we interact with people who see the world completely differently than we do.
Yeah, because Perez is essentially taking a sledgehammer to the rigid certainties that dictate so much of our societal conflict. He's proposing this framework to replace dogmatic facts with a much more fluid, deeply personal approach to faith and existence.
Which takes a lot of vulnerability.
It requires stripping away a massive amount of ego to even engage with the premise.
Well, let's jump straight into that core premise then, because the essay opens with a claim that will, it will immediately put some people on the defensive.
Oh, for sure.
His argument is that anything involving thought, consciousness, or the concept of God cannot truly be called a fact. It is, at its core, an opinion.
Which is huge.
It's massive. Because people build their entire identities around their theological or philosophical facts. So declaring all of that as mere opinion is a massive disruption to how society operates.
But his reasoning for that disruption makes a lot of sense when you consider the sheer scale of the unknown. The text points out that there are simply too many massive, unprovable possibilities out there.
Right.
You just can't declare anything in the spiritual realm as an absolute empirical fact.
And the scale of possibility he lays out in the text is just dizzying. We really have to consider two extreme ends of the spectrum.
Right. So on one end,
human beings might just be highly evolved animals with a profound sense of self-awareness, suffering from collective delusions of grandeur.
like we're just making it all up.
Yeah. In the context of a seemingly infinite universe, our daily dramas might be no more significant than the life cycle of bacteria on a rock.
But then on the complete opposite end of that spectrum, perhaps human existence is tied to something far greater, something far more intricate than our current biological hardware can even begin to comprehend.
Like we're tethered to something invisible.
Exactly. A cosmic architecture that is entirely invisible to us. And that vast, unknowable gap between insignificant bacteria and incomprehensible greatness, that's the exact reason we have to hesitate before calling anything a spiritual fact.
We just don't have the vantage point.
We don't. We simply do not have the vantage point to make that call.
To really ground that idea of the unknowable, Perez uses this incredible metaphor regarding consciousness and comus.
I loved this part.
That's a wild thought experiment. He posits, what if God is like air? Unseen, everywhere, the invisible substance that everything is sustained by.
And in that scenario, what if consciousness is simply the word we use for the soul?
Think about the actual mechanics of human breathing. When air leaves our lungs for good, the physical body might continue its biological processes for a few brief moments, but our awareness, ourselves...
It fades almost instantly. The lights go out.
Right. But how does this framework hold up against modern medicine? Like, what happens when a physical brain just shuts down, but the body is kept alive?
And that is where the coma metaphor becomes profoundly unsettling, but in a really good way. In a modern hospital room, we have machines that can artificially breathe for a patient.
Pumping the lungs?
Yeah, the biological entity is kept alive mechanically, but the awareness, the consciousness, the soul is completely suspended. The person is basically trapped in an invisible void between presence and absence.
And yet, sometimes, they wake up.
They do. The consciousness returns to the physical vessel.
Which forces the ultimate question. Where exactly was that consciousness during that suspension?
Right.
If the machine was just pumping air into meat and lungs, where did the eye go? And how does it know how to return?
We have zero empirical facts to answer that. None. Neuroscience can track brainwaves, sure, but it cannot locate the zip code of the soul during a 3-week coma.
I love that phrasing, the zip code of the soul.
It's true, though. And because there are so many profound mysteries like that, presenting our personal philosophies about the afterlife or the nature of God as objective facts is incredibly arrogant. At best, we are offering highly educated, deeply felt opinions.
So for you listening right now, consider your own deeply held views about existence. Think about the philosophies you treat as the foundational floorboards of your life.
The things you're absolutely certain of.
Exactly. How often do we present those unprovable ideas as empirical facts simply because the alternative, admitting that we are floating in a void of uncertainty, is too terrifying to sit with?
We factify our opinions just to feel a sense of security.
Factify, yeah. And craving that security is a deeply embedded survival instinct. I mean, we need the ground beneath our feet to feel solid.
Of course we do. But Perez makes a really sharp pivot here in the essay. He illustrates how this natural instinct morphs into something incredibly dangerous.
The two faces of belief.
Right. There are two very distinct faces to belief. Destructive certainty on one side and constructive potential on the other.
Let's examine that destructive side first. When we look at history, and even our current global landscape today, the harm of factified faith is undeniable.
It's everywhere.
When people speak about God or the precise, literal rules of the afterlife, with absolute, unwavering certainty, catastrophe usually follows.
Because if your opinion is a fact, then anyone who disagrees with you isn't just holding a different opinion. They are fundamentally incorrect, flawed, or even a literal threat to the truth.
Wars are waged over these rigid certainties.
Families are torn apart. Entire civilizations have been structured around and destroyed by people declaring their unprovable spiritual opinions as unquestionable laws of the universe.
And the pushback to simply suggesting this idea, just bringing it up, can be intense. The text notes Perez's personal experiences of hostility just for exploring beliefs outside of mainstream cultural acceptance.
Yeah, he shares anecdotes about being told that stepping outside the accepted dogma is dangerous or evil.
There's even mention of being accused of idolatry.
Which is such a loaded word.
Very loaded. In many rigid systems, any philosophy that teaches a different path to salvation or suggests a different interpretation of the divine is branded as idolatrous.
It's a defense mechanism. The rigid system cannot tolerate the introduction of uncertainty, so it attacks the questioner.
Which raises a really tough question for the analytical mind. If holding an unprovable belief as a fact is illogical and historically dangerous, why believe in anything without hard evidence?
Right, do we just throw it all out?
Yeah, if a logical mind struggles with faith because it lacks empirical proof, do we just abandon belief entirely?
That is the natural, cynical conclusion, but Perez entirely recontextualizes the argument here. Belief without evidence isn't inherently toxic. In fact, applied differently, it is the fundamental engine of human progress.
Belief in human potential.
Exactly. Belief in human potential is the exact mechanism that drives us forward.
The shift from belief as a weapon to belief as a tool. Think about the audacity required to write a book or compose a symphony or start a business. There is zero empirical evidence that you will succeed before you start.
None.
Believing you can run a marathon, complete an ultramarathon, or finish a triathlon when you have never pushed your body to that limit before, that belief isn't based on past facts. It is a projection into the future.
It creates the runway for action.
Yes.
The historical precedent for this is fascinating. The text looks at the 4-minute mile and Roger Bannister. For decades, the collective fact of the sporting and medical world was that a human being could not run a mile in under 4 minutes.
It was viewed as a biological limit.
The heart would explode, the lungs would collapse. That was the established certainty.
Until 1954, when Roger Bannister ran it in 3 minutes and 59.4 seconds.
And look at what happened immediately after. Within weeks, another runner broke it. Within a year, several more. Today, high school students do it.
Physiologically, human legs and lungs did not suddenly evolve in 1954.
No. The only thing that changed was the collective permission to believe it was possible. The wall wasn't physical at all. The barrier was entirely psychological.
It is wild to think about. A shift in belief unlocked a new reality. When belief is applied to actionable potential, like running an ultra or writing that book, it fuels effort. It demands discipline, growth, and resilience.
It is the exact same psychological mechanism of believing without seeing, but instead of fueling judgment and division, it fuels creation and achievement.
So this brings up a vital question of transmission. How do we pass this constructive mechanism down to the next generation without passing down the destructive rigidity?
Navigating cultural conditioning is one of the heaviest duties of a parent, or really anyone who mentors others.
The essay tackles this directly from a father's perspective. The goal in sharing varied beliefs with children or family members shouldn't be indoctrination.
It isn't about giving them a new set of rigid facts to blindly obey.
No, it's about equipping them to navigate an incredibly confusing world.
Because we are operating in a modern dilemma where everyone is bombarded with opinions masquerading as facts, the media landscape, social media algorithms, deeply ingrained cultural conditioning, they all demand absolute certainty.
Pick a side.
Right. Pick a side and defend it as the ultimate truth. To guide someone through that noise requires radical honesty.
And radical honesty in this context means looking someone in the eye and saying, I simply do not know. It means offering a wide panoramic view of how humanity has tried to answer these massive questions rather than forcing them to look through a single keyhole.
Exploring that panoramic view requires looking at different worldviews impartially. And for you listening, we want to be explicitly clear here. We are remaining strictly neutral. We are not endorsing one theology over another.
We're just analyzing the observations made in the source text regarding how different traditions function.
Exactly. We're looking at the mechanics. And the text observes that certain interpretations of major monotheistic religions, specifically branches of Christianity and Islam, place a very heavy defining emphasis on the concept of salvation.
The framework is often built around a rescue mission, right? Where exclusive adherence to specific facts grants access to heaven and avoids damnation.
Right. And in contrast, Perez points out that many Eastern traditions, or more mystical paths, operate on a different frequency. The focus shifts away from a rescue from damnation and leans heavily into cultivating present awareness, living rightly, and embodying deep compassion.
The text also clarifies a really common misconception about these traditions, too.
Oh, about the statues and symbols.
Yeah. While they might utilize statues, symbols, or revere specific gurus, the core teachings often explicitly state that the physical symbol is just a tool. It is a finger pointing at the moon, not the moon itself.
The breadth of wisdom drawn upon in this essay is incredibly eclectic. It doesn't throw out the major religions. It extracts the practical wisdom from them.
There's a profound admiration for the life and teachings of Jesus in the text. The essay highlights Jesus' compassion, his raw courage, and his absolute unwavering defiance of religious hypocrisy.
But a distinction is drawn between the historical, radical actions of Jesus and the dogmatic certainty of the entire Bible. The text acknowledges that reading the Bible cover to cover presents parts that are difficult, contradictory, and even frightening.
But the core example of Jesus' life remains a powerful anchor for Perez.
And that anchor sits right next to a profound reverence for other historical and spiritual teachers. The text specifically names Buddha, Gandhi, Wayne Dyer, Alan Watts, and the figure of Krishna.
It references seeking wisdom across the Upanishads, the Bible, the Quran, and the Bhagavad Gita. It's a huge spectrum.
Think about the connective tissue between those specific figures and texts. I mean, Alan Watts frequently spoke about the illusion of the separate ego, the idea that we are not isolated entities but expressions of the whole universe.
And the Upanishads explore the concept that the ultimate reality, Brahman, is identical to the innermost self, Atman.
Right. So when you synthesize these teachings with the compassion of Jesus or the nonviolent resistance of Gandhi, a distinct pattern emerges.
But the ultimate sobering takeaway from reading all of those diverse texts, not a single one of those figures and not a single one of those books contains all the facts.
Zero absolute monopoly on the truth.
Which is wild, because for someone who grew up believing their specific book had every single answer to the universe, realizing that no book has all the facts could cause a terrifying existential crisis.
It could lead to pure nihilism.
Yeah. But the narrative takes a beautiful turn here. Acknowledging that we don't have the facts doesn't mean abandoning the divine. It just means relocating it.
The divine is no longer an angry monarch sitting on a cloud demanding intellectual submission to unprovable facts. The text suspects that divinity exists within every single one of us.
Perez uses the term Christ consciousness to describe this.
Let's break down that term, because it can be loaded for a lot of people.
Christ consciousness in this context isn't about converting to a specific denomination. It is the idea that the sacred spark, the profound, unconditional love and connection demonstrated by figures like Jesus, is an inherent feature of the human operating system.
It is pre-installed in all of us.
Exactly. The problem is that our operating system is bogged down with malware. We rarely reflect that sacred spark clearly because it is buried under layers of cultural conditioning, fear, ego, and the desperate need to be right.
So how do we actually run a diagnostic and clear that malware? How do we access this relocated divinity?
The essay outlines very specific mechanics for this shift. Rigorous self-awareness, mindfulness, meditation, seeking solitude, asking hard questions, and honest seeking.
Notice what is missing from that list, though. There is no mention of convincing your neighbor that you are right.
Right.
There is no mention of defending a doctrine. The practices of mindfulness and solitude are internal. When people truly engage in these practices, they aren't doing it to achieve spiritual superiority or to impress a congregation.
They are doing it to strip the paint off the walls. The end goal of all that quiet contemplation and honest questioning is to systematically shed the illusions we've built our identities around.
When you sit in true solitude and watch your own mind, you start to realize how much of your anger, your judgment, and your certainty is just inherited conditioning.
You begin to see the world and the people in it differently.
The rigid walls between us and them start to look incredibly flimsy.
I want to turn this directly to you, the listener. What does your own specific conditioning look like?
It's a great question to ask yourself.
Think about the cultural, political, or religious opinions you were handed as a child or absorbed from your environment that you currently defend as absolute facts.
What happens if you interrogate those?
If you applied rigorous self-awareness and solitude to those beliefs, if you systematically stripped away your ego's need to be right and the fear of the unknown, what would actually be left standing?
Perez's conclusion, drawn from his own ongoing journey of stripping away those layers, is incredibly grounding. He observes that when the illusion falls away, what remains doesn't require complex theological defenses or hostile arguments.
What remains feels incredibly simple. What remains feels true.
Simple and true. Simple and true. That is the perfect distillation of this entire deep dive. Looking back at the massive landscape we just covered from Jimmy Perez's essay, the central thesis is a call to embrace uncertainty.
It is a challenge to demote our grand philosophies from weaponized facts back down to personal beliefs.
And the paradox is that embracing this uncertainty does not make us weak or lost.
Yeah.
Saying, I don't know, to the mysteries of the infinite universe opens us up to everything else.
It unlocks a vastly deeper level of human compassion. It allows for a genuinely honest pursuit of truth, and it redirects our energy away from destructive judgment and toward constructive, actionable potential.
We stop fighting over the invisible architecture of the afterlife and start building better realities here and now.
Which brings us to a final thought for you to chew on as you go about your day.
Yeah. We talked heavily about the 4-minute mile, how a shift in belief broke a psychological barrier and redefined human physical limits.
Perez talks about it as a psychological barrier broken by a shift in belief. So if our rigid certainties about the universe are just another psychological barrier, what impossible human achievements might we unlock as a society if we finally stopped fighting over whose unprovable opinion is right?
That is a fascinating question. Imagine the energy we could redirect.
It's huge. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep learning.